Is Burt going to betray Irving? Did Ms. Huang and Mrs. Coble come from the same place? Proof that Helena is pregnant with Mark's child? Let's break down all the details and analyze episode 6 of Severance. Let's start from the beginning. Milchik and Miss Huang. After Milchik's evaluation, he calls Miss Huang for a conversation. This scene is so short yet so good because to me it's clearly an act of retaliation from Milchik against Miss Huang for the anonymous complaints made against him in the previous episode. Anonymous? Not so much. As I said before, I'm absolutely certain that Ms. Huang filed those complaints, and by the looks of it, so is Milchik. Milchik tells her, I feel I should remind you, you cannot graduate from this fellowship until I have deemed you WinterTide material. In other words, Milchik is basically telling her, if you keep burning me with the higher-ups, I'll burn you too. And it's funny how Milchik scolds Ms. Huang, telling her to eradicate from your essence childish folly, which basically means grow up, while he himself was literally practicing in the mirror how to speak more simply. He says this to Ms. Huang, but in a way he's also acting immature himself. His subordinate criticized the way he speaks because it's difficult to understand. And let's be real, Milchik does talk in a complicated way. Ms. Huang's criticism was actually constructive, but instead of just taking the feedback and improving, he chooses to threaten the person who called him out. On the other hand, I don't know if you guys feel this way too, but sometimes I get the sense that Ms. Huang has a strong hunger for power. When Milchik tells her that he'll be out all day and that she'll be in charge of the severance floor, she looks immensely happy. But then when he adds that she can manage things from her own desk instead of sitting in his office, it's like a bucket of cold water was dumped on her. Her expressions after that moment gave me chills. Could Miss Huang be planning to take Milchik down? But the most intriguing part of this conversation is Milchik mentioning WinterTide, which is probably the source of the scholarship that Ms. Huang needs. But what exactly is WinterTide? It seems like it could be an organization or even a school, considering Ms. Huang is still a child. Maybe it's a school partnered with Lumon to offer internships or something similar. In the US, it's pretty common for companies to recruit interns during school breaks, letting them work part-time over the summer. But there's another possibility that might make even more sense. WinterTide could be a kind of elite sorority at the Myrtle Egan School for Girls. Only the best students would be accepted, and since the school carries the Egan name, it would make perfect sense for all the Kier philosophy to be passed down there. That philosophy aligns perfectly with Lumon's teachings, not to mention the Myrtle Egan School is where Ms. Coble studied as a child. This means Coble may have gone through the same process that Ms. Huang is now trying to complete in order to reach a high-ranking position. Just like Coble did as the manager of the Severance floor. Now let me mess with your mind a little while researching the term WinterTide, hoping to find some clues, because in this series, even the smallest detail can mean a lot. I didn't come across much at first, but by accident, I found a movie with the exact same name, WinterTide. And check out its synopsis. Beth, a volunteer watch person of an isolated northern city, battles a plague of depression that transforms the few remaining residents into empty, zombie-like automatons. Now, I could be overthinking this, and the name might mean absolutely nothing, but don't you think it's a crazy coincidence that this description has so many familiar elements? An isolated town, just like the one where Lumon seems to be located. Automatons, a term that has already been used in the show, and many fans suspect that the people seen during the ORTBO, who resemble the refinement workers, might actually be automatons or clones. This could be nothing, but it definitely feels suspicious. Now let's talk about the second love triangle in this series, Dyllan G, external Dyllan, and Gretchen. Dyllan G has been meeting with Gretchen for a while now, an incredibly effective strategy by Milchik to secure Dyllan G's loyalty. Through this, Dyllan G is getting an experience his innie self has never had before, and at the same time, he's learning more about his outie. But then comes the kiss between Gretchen and Dyllan G. Probably Dyllan G's first ever kiss. It's pretty obvious that there's chemistry between them. Gretchen makes it clear that she's enjoying these meetings with Dyllan G, and their conversations feel genuine. They genuinely like each other. Dyllan even says that he wishes they could be together all the time. And Gretchen replies, "But we are, aren't we?" To which Dyllan responds, "He is." I'm not. It seems like Gretchen wishes that this version of Dyllan, the one inside Lumon, was actually part of the Dyllan outside. There's something about Dyllan G that captivates her more than his outie self does. One key detail, Gretchen is lying to her husband about visiting Lumon to see Dyllan G. The reason why? Not entirely clear, but feelings are definitely involved. Now we do get some insight into external Dyllan's life. He seems to want to buy a new car, but Gretchen doesn't think it's a good idea. Earlier, she also mentions that external Dyllan once took swimming lessons at a pool, and they were expensive. This suggests that their financial situation isn't dire. They're not drowning in debt or struggling to survive, but they do need to be responsible with their spending. If they're not careful, things could spiral out of control. Basically, they're living on the edge. And Dyllan? He seems like a spender, someone who doesn't think much about money or financial responsibility. He just goes for it and leaves the burden on Gretchen to keep things in check. If it were up to Dyllan, they'd probably end up in serious trouble. Honestly, at times, it feels like Gretchen has 3 small kids and 1 oversized kid, external Dyllan. Now let's talk about Mark, Helly, and Hellena, starting specifically with Mark S. and Helly R. Helly finally learns about what happened between Mark S. and Hellena, who was pretending to be Helly during the external event. And of course, it couldn't have been more awkward with Mark saying they shared fluids. Come on, Mark, you're killing me here. But Helly's emotions and her reaction to all of this have multiple layers, which adds so much depth to her character. At this moment, Helly is feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Violated, used, betrayed, manipulated. It's as if something was taken from her, like she was robbed of her first time. That one unique moment, it's gone. There's no getting it back. What should have been a first is now a second. And all of these feelings hit her at once like a chaotic storm inside her, and Burt Lumon portrays this beautifully. But Helly isn't the kind of woman who just sits back. She's fierce. She's independent. Helly does what she wants, what she feels is right, and she doesn't care what anyone else thinks. She is her own person. Unlike her outie, Hellena, who follows a script, a pre-written guide on what to do, how to act, what's considered right, Hellena is a pawn in the Lumon game, following orders from her father, or sometimes not even her father. Anyone can dictate what she should or shouldn't do. Hellena is a kite in the wind. Her direction isn't up to her. Sure, the wind might lift her high, but someone else is holding the string, deciding if she stays up or is pulled back down. She's completely dependent on others. And the worst part, even to do something she actually wanted, like being with Mark, she had to pretend to be someone else, to steal a few minutes of Helly's life. Because Helly's life is less suffocating than her own. See the contrast here? Hellena is passive, controlled, shaped by others. Helly, on the other hand, wants to declare independence from the disgusting person that is her outie. After a lot of reflection, she even says, "She dresses me every morning like I'm a baby. She controls everything. I don't want her memories, I want mine." That's how strong Helly is. Even though Hellena stole her first moments with Mark, Helly still likes him, and she knows Mark was just as much a victim as she was. So screw it, they're going to create their own moment. But then Mark's nose starts bleeding and they go to Ms. Huang to take care of it. And suddenly, Mark S. starts showing symptoms of reintegration, shifting between his innie and his outie. This scene is confusing as hell, even for me. Reintegration is supposed to be about merging memories from both the innie and the outie into one. But here's where it gets weird. Mark S. sees himself in the basement before his outie is even there, which means that Mark S. is remembering something his outie did. But in the future, from his perspective, that shouldn't be possible. Was this a mistake, a poorly constructed scene, or was it intentional? The only way this makes sense is if, while Ms. Huang was treating Mark S., he somehow accessed a memory from another time, a different day in the basement from his outie's memories. Then after work, outie Mark remembers that moment from Mark S.'s perspective. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Now we need to talk about the dialogue and details of Mark and Hellena meeting at the Chinese restaurant. Mark is just casually eating when Helena walks in, and his shock at seeing her there makes total sense. Mark knows she's the president of Lumon. He knows how important she is. Someone like that eating at a random Chinese restaurant, that's like seeing Neymar having a drink at some local dive bar. It just doesn't add up. But thinking this meeting was just a coincidence is way too naive. Of course, Helena knew Mark was there. This reinforces the idea that Lumon is still watching him, keeping tabs on what he does, just like Kobold did when she was his neighbor. And honestly, I'd bet anything that Helena went there without any other Lumon members knowing. She went to finally meet the external Mark. Why? My gut tells me it's because she feels something for him. But there are some really interesting things going on here. The two of them actually have a pleasant conversation. And Helena mentions that her father was the one who created the severance procedure. She tells Mark he should meet her father, that it's about time, and that he would be the first. She says it jokingly, but I bet everything that she meant, every word. First, because she clearly already likes him enough to want something serious with him. And second, because of what she said about him being the first. Helena probably never had a boyfriend before. Her father likely never allowed her to have those experiences, never let her live a normal young woman's life. No wonder she wanted to enter the severed floor as Helly to finally experience what it's like to be wanted or even loved by someone. To live out a romance. That's honestly really sad. But when she says, it's about time, that could also fuel the theory that Helena is pregnant with Mark's child. Now, whether her father would approve of her having a baby with a severed worker, that's a whole different story. There's another detail that might support the pregnancy theory. When Mark leaves the restaurant, you can see the restaurant's name, Zhu Fu. In Chinese, Zhu Fu means grandfather. But notice that the lighting only illuminates the word Fu. I don't speak Chinese, but Fu can also mean father in Chinese. That could be a major clue. Mark walking out of a restaurant with Helena with father subtly highlighted in the background. And wait, there are even more hidden details in this dialogue. Like I said, their conversation is really enjoyable. After they talk about meeting her father and she says Mark would be the first, there's a pause. They just stare at each other for a moment, then suddenly start laughing. But right after, Mark has this moment of confusion. This is such a cool moment because it taps into deep human emotions. Mark S. had conversations with both Helly and Helena before, but that was the inner Mark. The external Mark never had that experience, and all of Mark S.'s conversations with Helly or Helena were always really fun. Helena and Mark had a great time making fun of Milchik and laughing a lot. So where am I going with this? Mark S. really enjoyed talking and joking around with Helly or Helena, and now without realizing it, external Mark is having just as much fun talking to Helena because Mark S. liked her. But external Mark has no idea why he's enjoying himself so much with someone he just met. And then at the end, when they're standing face to face, Mark stares at Helena intensely. In that moment, Mark is subconsciously feeling the same emotions that Mark S. felt for Helly. The admiration, the attraction, the urge to kiss her. Look at the cinematography here. The camera even shifts into portrait mode, where everything around them is blurred and only the subject remains in focus. Mark is feeling something deep and he doesn't even know why. That's incredible storytelling. Finally, we see Mark suddenly rushing out of the restaurant and heading straight home, desperate to do the procedure that would speed up his reintegration. A lot of people might not understand why he suddenly ran off like that, but it all comes down to Helena mentioning Hannah, or rather Gemma. At that moment, Mark realizes Helena is not as innocent as she seems. She's the president of the company, and Mark knows she's lying about Gemma. He knows she purposely said the wrong name to pretend Lumon has nothing to do with her. But Mark saw her at Lumon. He had a memory of seeing Gemma alive, standing right in front of Mark S. And now he's sure that Helena and Lumon are hiding things from him. Then after the procedure, Mark has another vision of Gemma. In this vision, her hair is slightly longer than when she appears as Ms. Casey, and the hallway seems to be inside Lumon. So did Mark S. actually see her there? Or is the reintegration process merging the memories of both Marks? And then there's an image of a woman, probably lying down. Based on her features, it seems to be Gemma. At first, I thought Mark was seeing her dead, but then we see the image again, and this time she blinks. And finally, let's talk about the most intriguing part of this episode. The dinner between Irving, Burt, and Fields. Right away, there's a cool little detail. Before going in, Irving adjusts his mustache, making sure he looks sharp. And why is that? Obviously, because of Burt. Once again, this reinforces the idea that severance might separate memories, but it can't erase feelings between people. Deep down, Irving still has feelings for Burt. It's a similar situation to what happened with Mark at the Chinese restaurant, which suggests that anyone who undergoes severance can experience this kind of emotional breach. Mark isn't going through this emotional turmoil just because he reintegrated. Severance simply doesn't block emotions like that. Now, before diving into all the details, I just want to drop my theory right away, and then I'll explain why I believe it. I think Burt has some connection to Lumon. Maybe he holds a high-ranking position there, or maybe he has a direct partnership with Helena's father. Heck, he could even be a co-owner of Lumon, and it's possible he never even underwent severance at all. One key clue is the nickname Burt and Fields use for each other. Attila. Attila was the king of the Huns, ruling the largest empire of his time in Europe. He had a brother named Blede, and while it's not confirmed, there are rumors that Attila killed his own brother. This immediately reminds me of the Keir family history, where one brother also killed the other. There's so much to unpack in this church dialogue between Burt and Fields that honestly, I'd rather wait for the next episode before going too deep. Otherwise, we'll be here for 4 hours. Anyway, Burt and Fields explain to Irving why they call each other Attila, and Fields asks if Irving knows the story. Burt immediately shouts, "He knows the story." But let's remember, technically these external versions of Burt and Irving don't know each other at all. They've never had a conversation before this dinner. So how is Burt so sure that Irving knows about Attila? That's a pretty specific thing to assume. Now, Burt's innie would have known that Irving's innie was into that kind of thing. They had a lot of conversations inside Lumon, and it was clear that Irving was very knowledgeable. That, to me, is one of the biggest clues that Burt was never severed. This external Burt is the same Burt that Irving's innie knew. Then Fields corrects Burt, saying they started calling each other Attila 20 years ago, not 10, as Burt had said. Fields even insists that he remembers them having drinks with Lumon's business partner. We know that Lumon's first office was created 12 years ago, which Irving immediately questions. This adds to the theory that Burt was one of the people who helped establish Lumon, and that connection could lead back to Helena's father, James Egan. In fact, James Egan might be the Lumon partner that Fields is referring to. Burt and James Egan could be close, and Burt might not be trustworthy at all. Another big piece of evidence that Burt is deeply tied to Lumon and still working for them is what happens when Irving goes to Burt's house. At that exact moment, Drummond shows up and breaks into Irving's place. That's way too convenient, isn't it? Drummond just happens to show up at Irving's house right when he's with Burt. That smells like a setup to me. Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments with your theories. Hope you enjoyed the analysis and all the details from episode 6 of Severance today. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. I really appreciate it. See you in the next Severance video. Thanks, and until then.